To help us continue the countdown to next year's 250th birthday of these United States, Tony Dokoupil takes a closer look at our nation's most enduring document.
Ladies and gentlemen,
it was 1986 when Looney Tunes aired this public service announcement featuring Bugs Bunny.
For 200 years, amendments have allowed our Constitution to grow with the country. The 13th, for instance, put an end to slavery, while the 19th gave women the vote. It was intended to be amended, the Constitution.
That was then. This is now.
You have to go back more than 50 years to find a meaningful change to the Constitution. How long can we work as a country without updating, reviving our Constitution?
Well, the real fear that the founders had was that we would stop listening to each other.
Jeffrey Rosen heads the National Constitution Center in Philadelphia.
They thought self-government was hard, and that crucially requires deliberation and debate.
Before anyone could even consider a national constitution, of course, there was the Declaration of Independence, ratified in 1776, and the Articles of Confederation, agreed to in 1777, a full decade before the new Constitutional Convention.
Why did we need it? Why wasn't the Declaration and the Articles of Confederation enough?
Support for the Constitution as ratification was pretty slender.
Jill Lepore has written more than a dozen works of American history. Her latest, We the People, describes a constitution ratified by the people it governed and designed to be changed by the very same. In other words, we aren't stuck with any of it. The U.S. Constitution includes, in addition to the 3 equal branches of government and a schedule of regular elections, a mechanism for change to the Constitution itself.
They came up with this Article 5 of the Constitution, which is the amendment provision, which had been insisted on by the people. People were like, if you were going to have a written document, we need to have the ability to amend it ourselves.
In fact, Lepore says, though we often think of the Constitution as the final draft, it was always designed to be a work in progress.
Many Americans might assume that the framers finished their work in Philadelphia in 1787 and thought, great, it will never change again. But clearly they expected it to be revised constantly.
Yeah, they absolutely did. And remember, like, a whole bunch of them refused to sign it because they didn't think it was good enough.
Before the states would agree to ratify it, she says, some insisted on revisions. The result, a set of amendments we now know as the Bill of Rights.
It was a huge debate. There were more than 200 amendments proposed by the states.
This early draft at the New York Public Library shows 12 of those proposed amendments. The final version, ratified in 1791, was whittled down to 10, including some of the bedrock ideas of modern America: freedom of speech and religion, a right to bear arms, and, for the accused, the promise of a fair trial.
Our Constitution actually is supposed to be, Hamilton said, it's like a sunbeam.
But the Constitution was also a tangle of compromise and omission. None more tragic than the compromise over the institution of slavery and the exclusion of women from political life. Rosen says there was one concession, though, that James Madison, one of the document's framers, would not make.
He refused to admit into the Constitution an endorsement of slavery. He said the idea that there could be property in men wouldn't be written into the Constitution because they want to leave it up to future generations to eradicate slavery.
Though it took 100 years and a civil war, America at last had what some call its second founding, adding amendments that, among other things, abolished slavery, guaranteed citizenship to the formerly enslaved, and gave all men the right to vote, regardless of race.
This is just an amazing artifact.
Meredith Mann is one of the curators of the library's upcoming celebration of the country's 250th anniversary.
This is the roll call for the House of Representatives. So this is the sheet of paper where they kept track of who voted yay, who voted nay for the passage of the 13th Amendment.
It was just this incredible day. Galleries were packed. They even had women in the galleries. Frederick Douglass's son, Charles Redmond, was in the gallery. And the house just was nearly blown over by the burst of energy.
It's trying to make the promise of the Declaration that's absent from the Constitution real.
Exactly.
It is up to us.
These days, even though the language of the Constitution hasn't changed lately, the interpretations still have.
We still reinterpret it quite regularly, and by we, I mean the Supreme Court.
That's absolutely right. And none of the founders expected constitutional change to come mostly from the Supreme Court.
Well, so I find this actually to be one of the craziest facts. The Constitution does not give the Supreme Court the right to determine the constitutionality of a law passed by Congress. They just assert that right.
They did.
Rosen says the Constitution is still the answer to our problems, not the cause. And yet, for the moment, he worries about how it's being used.
Checks and balances. They're in there, they matter. How are they working?
There's a broad agreement that checks and balances are not working now the way they were supposed to. Congress has stopped acting and refuses to check presidents of its own parties, and the courts have become vastly more powerful than the founders anticipated in deciding almost every political question and insisting that they have the last word. So whether or not you like what's going on in our politics today, I think you have to say this is not what the founders intended.
The founders never claimed to have created a perfect country, but in the Constitution, they did try to pass on the tools to build a more perfect union.
There are people who think the Constitution is so old at this point, it has no bearing on the life of our country today. To that, you say what?
The Constitution was written in the 18th century, but it was expressing principles vindicated as recently as yesterday's news. The basic idea that a president should not be a king, that power corrupts, that we are a government of laws. These are the ancient ideas of freedom, and every country that has forgotten them has descended into dictatorship and tyranny. It is historically irresponsible to dismiss the Constitution as outdated. It's absolutely eternal and timeless.